Good afternoon and welcome everyone. This is our kickoff session of the Silicon Valley Center for Entrepreneurship's Eminent Speaker Series that we hold in coordination with the Ideas Club at San Jose State University. And it is our first ever webinar as well. And so welcome to you all, and delighted that we have noted entrepreneur, author, and educator Steve Blank with us this afternoon. So that's really exciting. I will just introduce Steve to you here before we start off on our Q&A. But I just wanted to say that, like I said before, this is our first webinar. So I have to say, I'm a little bit nervous about it, but I'm hoping it'll work. We have got Sanit and Vamsi from our online learning management team. Thank you very much for being here. In case Steve or I disappear into the, I don't know, the atmosphere or something, they will hopefully bring us back, resurrect us if we disappear from our virtual world. And then we also have 3 students here, Amer and Aladdin and Nima, who are here to help us with the questions. So Steve really needs no introduction. He's an 8-time serial entrepreneur, and he has written 4 different books, 2 of which are right here with me. I don't know whether you can see them. The Startup Owner's Manual, and his first book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And we use the Startup Owner's Manual in our class, so we are really excited to have him here this afternoon. He is the pioneer of the customer development methodology, which spawned the lean startup movement. And so that's what, started him on his book journey. And of course, the number of startups that he helped to found as well. And so he lectures on entrepreneurship and customer development at Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia, and various other places. And we're really, really happy that he could join us here this afternoon. And so what we are planning to follow is that we will have I will ask him some questions, and then we'll open up the Q&A to the audience. I am getting some messages saying that the link is not working, so I'm a bit worried about that, but at least we have 140 people online, so 140 people made it, so I'm hoping that the others will make it eventually. And then if you have any questions, you are most welcome to ask them once we are through. So Steve, I was thinking that if you don't mind, if we can start at the very beginning. And so how do you come up with an idea before customer development? Can you give some advice to the students? Oh, one sec. Before that, can I just ask, can I just launch a poll for a minute to see who we have here in the audience? And so how many, can you see this poll? How many of you are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs? Let's see what. Just to get an idea of, just to give Steve and all of us an idea of the audience.
Anu, can you introduce yourself?
That's true. I didn't in my stress. Yeah. So I'm Anu Basu, and I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at San Jose State University. I also am director of the Silicon Valley Center for Entrepreneurship, and our mission is to promote entrepreneurship at the San Jose State campus and beyond. And so it's as part of that, we have speaker events. They are usually on campus, and they are held to try and inform and inspire our students to be entrepreneurs and to be successful entrepreneurs. And as Steve would say, to fail less. And so, in fact, Steve came and spoke to us 8 years ago when the book, when the Startup Owner's Manual first came out. And so we're really excited that he's back here except, in this virtual arena. And so here we see the audience. 71% are, 97 people say that they are or want to be entrepreneurs. So, okay, fine. That's great. I hope you'll feel the same way when we end the session. So thank you for that. Okay. So, oh, you can't see this? Can you see the results now? Okay, great. Okay. All right. So, Steve, as I was asking you, are there, like, what would be, how do you come up with an idea even before customer development? Do you have any tips for the 30%?
So the short answer is no. The longer answer, it's kind of like asking someone, do you have an idea for a painting or a sculpture or or a novel? There are ways to increase your creativity and kind of practice that. Tina Seelig at Stanford has classes on creativity and innovation. And in fact, it's very funny. When she first started teaching creativity classes, I kind of went like, who the heck needs creativity classes? My problem is I have too many ideas and can't figure out which ones to pick. And then, she slapped me on the side of the head and said, well, that's why you're a founder. Most people, don't know where to even start. And it took me a long time to realize, way after my entrepreneurial career, that founders of companies are closer to artists than any other profession. That is, founders see things that other people don't. They hear things that other people don't. When there's a story that when someone came to Michelangelo's studio, a great Renaissance artist and sculptor, and saw a 12-foot block of marble, and they asked him, well, what is this? He said, can't you see it? It's the world's most beautiful sculpture. And they said, no, it's just a 12-foot block of marble. And he said, well, come back in 3 years. And in 3 years, they came back, and there was a sculpture of something called the Pieta, which is one of the most beautiful sculptures in the world. They said, how did you do that? And he said, well, I just removed the stone around it. It's a big idea. That's what founders do. Founders sometimes see the entire finished product on day one. Elon Musk is going to Mars. He's not building a rocket engine or a rocket or even satellites, but he sees, people on Mars. Steve Jobs didn't build the Apple II. I was around when both him and Gates were talking about this crazy idea of a computer on everyone's desk and pocket. And that was 40 years ago. That was insane. But they saw the world the way they wanted it to be. So that's a long answer to a short question. What I just described are kind of visionaries.
Yes, I was about to say.
Is most entrepreneurs think they're visionaries, but the data says most of you are actually hallucinating. But just like great artists, it's this passion to create that gets you up off of the floor when inevitably you're knocked on your rear end. That is, most of your ideas, like most paintings and most sculptures, actually don't work or aren't masterpieces, but your passion for creation will help you get up and do it again and again and again. And so I remind founders of companies, not employees, but founders, being an entrepreneur, a founder, it's the world's worst job. It's a shitty job, excuse me, but it is the world's best calling. And this distinction between a job and a calling is pretty important. If you're not passionately engaged in making something happen, you could be an employee of a startup, but to create something from nothing, that's a different skill. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it was a pretty good one for the first question.
Right. Yeah, you answered it really well. Although I was thinking that, as you said, there are, what you talked about was about visionaries, and maybe visionaries don't need to ask their customers what they want. But like you said, there are very few people like that who really don't need to ask anyone, before they come up with this new product or, new idea. And
well, it depends whether you're making something for yourself. when all you're doing is starting something to satisfy your own needs, then you really don't need to get out of the building and don't buy any of my books or don't follow lean methodology or whatever. And by the way, there's no reason to do that. But if in fact what you're trying to do is build something for lots of other people, you might want to actually have an understanding of at least what people care about or what they want or what the world looks like today versus where you want it to go, rather than just sitting in your room and guessing. And the lean methodology is simply, do I think I could predict the future by sitting in my office or cubicle or dorm? Or do I think my vision might be better informed? Because on day one, a startup is nothing more than a religious activity. If you think about it, it's a faith-based activity. The minute you have that idea, it's just based on faith and passion. And that's okay. That's what it takes, is faith and passion. But here's the idea. You want to quickly turn that faith into facts. Big idea, turn the faith into facts as rapidly as possible. And one of the key ideas about the lean startup and the customer development process, which is part of it, is there are no facts inside your building, so get the hell outside. There's no way you could possibly pre-compute every customer need, desire, feature request, pricing, etc., sitting in your office or dorm. Just not possible. And the corollary to that is the smarter you are, and all of you who are listening to this will give you credit for being incredibly smart because you showed up at this webinar by a noob. The smarter you are,
made it. And you made it despite the problems with the link.
The smarter you are, the harder it is for you to believe that you might be wrong. In fact, that's the toughest part of customer development. Oh, I already understand customer problems or needs, so let's get out of the way, stop all this other stuff. Let's start building it. Or, I asked a couple of my buddies and, or people in a sorority or dorm or, my parents, and they love the idea. So now let's raise money and start building it. Nothing's going to stop you from doing that. But the data says you might actually want some additional information to kind of validate that. Is to
oops. Is this our first tech problem?
I think there's some network problem at his place.
Is it a problem at Steve's place?
Yeah.
As we get back, as Steve gets back, I hope you got the important idea that he said, which kind of answered my question, which was going to be like, what's the point of customer development? Like, what's the point of talking to customers? And he answered that question really well. Like,
so I don't know what question I answered, but I thought I.
Yes. Ouch. Yeah.
Sorry, Anu. Did I lose you?
Good. You're back. Yeah. So you answer the question of why go out of the build, why talk to customers, right?
Yes.
And so now, so I think that's pretty clear. And I'm so glad that you're back with us. And so my next question was, well, all right. So if everyone agrees that customer development is important, that it's important to talk to customers before you come up with a product, and you do it as soon as possible, and you want to change your faith into facts, then the question is, how do you get out of the building when you are in this current COVID-19 and social distancing situation? And so do you have any tips on what our student entrepreneurs can do in order to address this challenge that they have? Or maybe it's an opportunity?
Yeah, and thank you for bookending that with, is it an opportunity? This year, like at all schools, my classes at Stanford are all remote. And my Lean Launchpad and what are called Hacking for Defense classes, students have to get out of the building and talk to 100 customers or regulators or partners in a year. And you would think, well, okay, COVID, we can't get out, how class is canceled, right? And we went, no, you don't get it. It's actually easier to get a hold of people now because there are typically a lot fewer gatekeepers, that is secretaries and admins and schedulers, between you and the people you want to talk to. And a good number of them, at least in the beginning of COVID, and probably still true now, are sitting at home in their underwear, when watching the top of Zoom, bored out of their minds, and might be interested in like something different. And so we found it's doing customer discovery, that is not getting an order, but asking some of the basic questions to some really interesting people. We actually found you could probably do anywhere to between 20% and 50% more discovery interviews, because you don't have to drive, you don't have to whatever. And yeah, you know, I used to insist you've got to see them all in person. But if you have high quality Zoom and you could see whether they're looking at their watch or playing with their kid on their lap or something else, you can know whether you have their attention. And so the data is pretty good. You know, the thing you can't do, and as all of you have now been on Zoom for months, is you're missing a whole nother component of, you know, who's sitting next to them, who's doing the subtle cues of eye rolls or side glances or passing notes under the table or chatting with each other, etc. And so it makes customer validation, that is, the next step after customer discovery is understand problem, understand solution, test some of the ideas. But okay, give me an order. That's tougher. But by the way, people are still doing now enterprise sales worth of millions of dollars across Zoom. And so that's even possible. And so you could test minimum viable products, that is, test your ideas. It just, obviously it's not in front of people's eyes and hands, and they can't hold it, etc. But I found techniques, for example, like pre-recording 30-second snippets of a demo that you could play over Zoom instead of doing live things. So you could play it and in one window be watching reactions of the people in the room, or, you know, little summaries of rotating a product, etc. So even testing, again, what we call minimum viable products are possible, just a little more work. So to answer your question, it turns out you could get out of the building quite well. And actually, post-COVID, big idea, where I used to say, no, you got to see people in person. I'd almost say now, even after COVID, all your first calls ought to be video conferencing, because you'll be able to save an enormous amount of time and get to people across the country and the world in a way you never were able to do before.
And would you, that's true. It would save a lot of time. Would you recommend that for certain types of services and to reach those customers, to join maybe Facebook groups and, you know, online groups to try and target people who may be interested in facing those problems?
So I would use all your social media connections, and whether it's TikTok or WeChat or This Week or Facebook or Instagram or any social media, the YouTube channels for demos, etc. So remember, part of the, you know, one part of discovery is how do I get and find people? You know, the next part is how do I get them either to show up or get some awareness on a web page, etc. The thing to remember, though, and this is really hard for first-time entrepreneurs and students, even multiple entrepreneurs, is this whole first part of the lean startup called customer discovery, customer development. It's not sales. It's a big idea. The goal is not to get an order. The goal is to get the most learning at any one time. And it might be interesting, Anu, to just give a 30-second intro of what lean is, and because I'm mentioning a bunch of pieces. So the lean startup is basically, think of it as just a kind of a container, a holder for three pieces of ideas. And the lean startup idea itself says, look, you know, we could just build stuff and throw it against the wall, meaning, you know, build it and see if people will come, or, you know, build a website or build an app or whatever. It just says, maybe if we do some testing early, we could eliminate a lot of dumb mistakes and stop us from burning money or wasting our time, etc. And so we discovered that there are a couple of things you actually want to test before you spend a lot of money. And you know, it sounds dumb in hindsight, but I spent 20 years doing 8 startups, screwing it up. And here are some of the things you might want to test is, who are the customers? Well, what do you mean, who are the customers? Well, are they, you know, people, urban youth sitting in cities, or are they your grandmothers sitting in the Midwest, you know, who might be 50, 60 years old? Or are they some combination of multiple customers? Okay, well, all right, we'll figure out who the customers are. Well, what else do you want to know? Well, what problem do they have? Well, what do you mean what problem they have? They obviously need my product. See, here's my product. They need it. Well, before you build your product and assume they need it, every product, and this is just a big idea, every product either solves a problem or fulfills a need.
Mm-hmm.
And implicitly, before you jumped into that product or services, in your head, you probably implicitly skipped a step which said, my product or app or service is going to solve this problem or need.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you make sure that you've tested whether someone other than you has that problem or need, or will have that problem or need? And then when you do that, figure out that not only do they have that problem, but they need these specific features that you're building. So now the first two things you're figuring out is, who are the customers and what do they need and what features? Those first two things have a fancy name called product market fit. So when you hear the word product market fit, it's who are the customers and what job do they want to get done? What features, what pains and gains are you solving? And what's really interesting is, sitting in your room, you could come up with some pretty good guesses. And I will make a lot of money betting every one of you is that you're probably wrong. Because this comes back to the no facts inside the building. So just get the heck out, humor me, talk to 10 people, and if they all say you're absolutely right, you don't have to talk to them anymore. And of course, what always happens is your initial assumptions, your fancy Stanford word is hypotheses, but it actually means everywhere else you're just effing guessing about your first ideas. And there are other things eventually you want to test is, how do we get customers? How do we keep them? How do we grow them? What's the right way to distribute the product? That is an app through a Apple App Store or Google Play Store, or is it a retail product, or is it something else? You know, how are we going to price it? What's our pricing strategy? What are the costs, et cetera? And it turns out all of these things you want to test, there's probably about 9 important ones. Someone developed something called the business model canvas. And so if the first part of this lean thing is this, like, figure out how to get it out of the building, that's called customer development. That was my invention. The second part is, what do you want to test when you're outside the building? A guy named Alexander Osterwalder came up with this one piece of paper called the business model canvas. And it simply says, if you're a startup, why don't you remember that these things are important to, you know, building a business? Who are the customers? What do they want? Distribution channel, et cetera. And then finally, the last part, which is, my student Eric Rees came up with a great insight. He said, Steve, you know, in the 20th century, you're an old guy. You grew up building products which were in a method called waterfall engineering, which meant you came up with the idea, you gave the spec to engineering. They sat in a room with, you know, caffeine and sugar for 1.5 years, and then eventually a product came out. That was called waterfall engineering. But in the 21st century, we could build products iteratively and incrementally, that is, a step at a time, using something called agile engineering. And when you do that, that is, build a piece, test it, build a piece, test it, you could actually build something called minimum viable products, or MVPs. And that just means we could take a wireframe or a prototype or something, or even a PowerPoint slide, and print it in front of a customer as we're out there or on Zoom and say, so I heard you have this problem and I've understood, you know, you're looking for the solution. How about this? And you could get immediate feedback. And the last part of this lean startup method, which is kind of a consequence of those 3 pieces. Remember, customer development, using a business model canvas, agile engineering, is a radical idea, at least in the 20th century. Now you all will laugh, going, duh, which says if you get enough data that says any one of your assumptions are wrong, you are allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say, well, we thought the customers were going to be these people on day 1, but, you know, we spoke to 150 of them and they don't care, but these people over here care. Or we found the right customers, but they said features 7, 12, and 27 were the only ones they care about. We could leave the rest of those features we thought were important. You know, we don't even have to code them or develop them, but people will grab this other stuff out of our hands. In the 20th century, you weren't allowed to do that. You didn't find that out until way after you developed the entire feature set, hired salespeople, shipped the product, and then discovered that people weren't buying. And so this finding out that you're wrong and allowed to change has a special word in lean. It's called the pivot. And the pivot is just a fancy word that says, hey, I was kind of wrong. Don't shoot me. We're going to change our mind. And the pivot is not to be confused with attention deficit disorder, which says, I just heard something from one person, so let me run back to my engineering team and change my mind. Does that make sense? And so that's the context of lean. And so for those of you listening who are under, like 40, this lean method seems why, of course, how else would you build products? Well, in the 20th century, we were kind of dumb. Venture capitalists assumed when you wrote a business plan, here's what I'm going to do. They gave you money. You were not allowed to change until you started firing people. You fired your VP of sales, then you fired your VP of marketing, and each one of them would do essentially a pivot, but you would be spending a lot of money and time. Right now, lean is essentially how startups in the 21st century operate like a blur, just like moving so fast because you're getting new data, you're testing, you're using A/B testing, you're using all these online tools, you're getting data, you've instrumented your product, and you're continually learning by getting new data. And did that help?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because, you talked about, you put it into the frameworks of customer development, business model canvas, and then agile engineering, coming up with an MVP, and then if necessary, pivot. Now, so you said that, yes, you need product market fit. That's the first stage. And how do you know? How do you know you have product market fit? So, when you test, when you ask customers, assuming you're asking the right, you have to figure out, are you asking the right customers? I mean, there are so many issues here, right? Are you asking the right customers? Are you asking the right questions? Are you, if they say they don't want XYZ feature, then you change it. And then at what point, like, how do you know that you have product market fit? Is there one way of sort of knowing? Is there any indicator?
Yeah, you get an email. The product market fit committee sends you an email and says, no, seriously, people are looking for their email. Seriously. So let me go up and explain something else first, though I will answer your question, which is how do you know product market fit? It turns out that how do you know you have product market fit depends on what type of startup you are. And I'm going to give you what I mean by that. You could be a startup in an existing market. What's an existing market? If I hold up a cell phone, and I say I'm building one of these, you kind of know what the cell phone market is. In fact, you could tell me what the features are on the basis of competition. Excuse me. Gee, I want either a bigger screen, or I want a faster processor, or I want something else, or pick whatever market you're in, or video games, I know what I like, etc. An existing market, the axes of competition are pretty well understood. And why that's important is in an existing market, you could go outside and ask people, so what are the most important features you'd like to get fixed? Or what's most important to you that you'd like faster? And sometimes always the answer you think is cheaper, but not always. Sometimes it's really not cheaper, it's something else. And doing customer discovery this way, part of lean is pretty simple. You go out and ask people. But what you almost always hear is people say, well, that's not how Steve Jobs did, whatever, and that's not how Henry Ford built a car, or else if he would have asked, people would have said a horse with 6 legs or whatever. It turns out both Jobs and Henry Ford analogy or story is actually talking about when you're creating a new market. Imagine you were showing an iPhone in 1985. There's no basis, people wouldn't know what the heck it is. So in a new market, you can't ask, when there isn't even an equivalent product, you can't ask, do you want it 20% faster? They don't even know what the thing is or what it does. And so your first reaction is, well, I guess I don't get out of the building. I just build whatever my vision is. And you can, if you believe you're Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. But I found in new markets, what you really want to do is get out of the building and do the following. You want to do customer discovery and development, but you want to ask different questions. You want to understand what's the day in the life of the customer today, and what's it going to look like when I change the world? And when you start asking that, it requires you to deeply understand not only how do people use horses, where do they stable them? What do the roads look like for horses? Gee, will my cars actually work on the roads? The answer was no. What else? Oh, I'm going to need like other things like gasoline infrastructure, eventually gas stations. Oh, I'm going to need people who know how to make gasoline at scale. I mean, so you will actually get out of the building and you'll discover, oh, there might be some adjacent products and ancillary things and maybe laws that needs to be changed, or maybe culture or custom needs to change, et cetera, for my vision to take place. And it doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means you'll kind of be able to articulate to investors, to yourself, et cetera, what each step needs to be, not just me build the product and then the world will immediately change. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that's
and,
really
and so now to answer your question of how do I know when I have product market fit? In an existing market, like if you're like showing somebody a minimum viable product of a better something, you'll know when their pupils dilate, which is why you need, high resolution zoom, or they lean forward and say, give me that through the screen. I want that now. Or you say, a test is, well, it's not done yet. But they say, oh, put us on the list. You go, well, give me $20 now and I'll hold the place for you. And if they say yes, then you kind of are getting early signals. Or if it's an online something, will they register and give you an email, or they'll give you a credit card number and want to be first in line, etc. Getting responses like, oh, that's nice, come back when you have the product, is actually get the heck out of here, I'm not really interested in, right? And a new market is kind of different. And a new market is the signals are subtly different, but you still want active engagement of, you're not leaving until we figure out how to work together to make this happen. Or, what Tesla did, which I think is a great example of new market, they got people paying them hundreds and thousands of dollars for cars and trucks that they admit, I don't know, we'll make it in a couple of years. And what do you think? But you could be first in line. They got 1 million people putting money down for a Cybertruck. And if you say, well, they only put down $500, that's $500 million of other people's money to fund their company on just a set of slides and maybe a sheet metal prototype. And again, I'm not knocking them. I'm just suggesting, if you want to see what product market fit looks like for new markets, Tesla is kind of a good idea. They're actually not getting interest, they're getting orders. Cancelable orders, but at least people are putting skin in the game. And that's what I ask people to do in a startup is, don't tell me, oh, they liked it. Tell me they put money down for a reservation, or they, bought the product, and you could tell them 100% cancelable or whatever, you'll get your money back. But until people are engaged, you don't really know. Right. And then I'll give you a more tactical answer. When I was building enterprise software, that is software sold to other companies to manage their business, that was cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. I was demanding payment with a fully cancelable purchase order. That is, if we didn't deliver, you get your money back. But I was asking for $500,000 up front. And when I got 5 of those deals, I said, I have product market fit. Time to scale the sales force. Let's go hire like there's no tomorrow. But let's just change that for a second. If I was building an app and got 5 orders at $9.99, right? So the numbers don't work. So you also have to say, how much is the product, how easy it is to order, and how much commitment do you need to make? And that's why I was being half facetious of, you get a memo. Actually, you kind of get a signal, but it's up to you and your investors to say, do we have product market fit? And it's not just do we have it, is what does that mean? And for me, having product market fit says you're ready to start scaling. And by scaling, it's a fancy word for hiring sales, putting demand creation activities, that is, search is spending money on search engine optimization, or all the other things I might do on the web and the net to kind of get traffic inside or get orders and whatever. I'm going to spend a lot of cash, and I'm going to raise a lot of cash, because I got to look investors in the eye and say, we got some serious data here, because here's the hockey stick we think we got, even though it might be 5 people. Seriously. When I went from 0 to 5, I raised another $15 million on those 5 orders. And nowadays I kind of laugh, is that's unfortunately today a seed round. I mean, I'm being half facetious, but back then that was real money.
Mhm.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's really great you drew the distinction between. So there's so many factors: existing
Yes.
market, new market, nature of the product.
Yes. So let me give you and your students one other factor about
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, and this one really kind of messed me up for a while. You know, I was an entrepreneur for 21 years. I did 8 startups, everything from enterprise software to military intelligence to video games to supercomputers, um, and had a great time. But to me, an entrepreneur and a startup meant you had a napkin sketch, and you were going to get to 100 million bucks in revenue in a couple of years, and $1 billion of revenue, or you were going to go out of business. There was nothing in between. That was my notion of entrepreneurship and what entrepreneurs and startups were about. And when I started teaching it, first at UC Berkeley in the business school, and now at Stanford in the engineering school at Berkeley, I had a great mentor who said, Steve, perhaps you want to sit through my entrepreneurship class. I said, well, I know an entrepreneur. He said, no, you might want to see what I'm teaching. And so I sat through the first session of his class, and I didn't understand the darn thing he was saying. What? It turns out he was teaching small business entrepreneurship. And by small business entrepreneurship, he was teaching people how to run grocery stores and, restaurants and whatever. I didn't even know that was a thing. I mean, of course it's a thing. And what I realized is I was lacking, and here's a fancy word, a taxonomy, a model, like an org chart of the types of startups and entrepreneurs there are and that are possible, at least in the United States. And so I just want to list that for you and your students, because it's subtly different about what you want to learn and how do you go about it.
Mhm.
Number one is there are what I call lifestyle entrepreneurs. That
Mhm.
is, I live right on the coast of between Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz, and actually some of my friends um, spend all day in the water. They do kite surfing at Waddell Creek. It's their lives, and to like pay for their rent and buy food, they say they have a little shack that says surfing lessons 9:15 to 10:30 in the morning. And that's how they figured out that's all that's necessary for them to live. Now, think about it. They're entrepreneurs. They have a startup, but you know what? They have no interest in hiring other people. They, run their business to maximize the area under the curve of rent, food, and maybe, to support their car and their surfing habit. And that's it. But they are entrepreneurs, and that is a startup. But that's not really scalable. You can't raise money. It's not going to get much bigger. They're not going to open surf shops. They have no interest. The next step up in complexity are small business entrepreneurs. Now, 99.5 or 8% of all companies in the United States are small business. And the US government says a small business is under, I think, 500 people. So that's what they consider small. But if that's what the country is, this United States, even though we live and work in Silicon Valley, is still a country of small businesses. And I was talking about a small business as a restaurant or dry cleaners, but it could also be database marketing person or a web designer or something else. But the idea of a small business is you're happy to provide food for yourself, your family, maybe an extended family. Maybe you might be interested in opening up a branch or whatever. But if you think about it, you're not raising venture capital money. This is a big idea. Why? Because the size and scale of your business, even after 20 years, is not going to be a unicorn. That is not going to be $1 billion. It might be attractive for a bank loan or for money from friends and family and relatives, but because the return, which is a fancy word for how much investors could make, is not equivalent to investing in a Google or Facebook. Number one, you can't raise crazy money. Number two is people are not coming to work in your restaurant or wherever from around the world. You'll be lucky to hire friends or family or relatives or local people, and they won't be the best and the brightest. If you're smart, you'll hire good people, but it's not going to be a magnet for others. It will be, a local job hiring. So number two is the class of people you could hire are good, but not the world's best. So you're limited by money, you're limited by whatever. And again, as I said, the scale is kind of limited, but there's nothing wrong with that. And you are an entrepreneur. Big idea. When you run a small business, you're an entrepreneur. When you run a small business, you are doing a startup. When you run a small business, everything we're teaching you about lean is absolutely true for you. It's just how you scale and how you raise money is different. The third type of startup, Silicon Valley, that's the stuff I did, scalable startups. shoot for the moon, or fall on your face. That's why I did 8 of them, because I had 2 of them that left craters so deep they had their own iridium layer, which is a fancy word for they were big public disasters, right? I mean, I was on the cover of Wired magazine 90 days before I had to call my mother and tell her I lost $35 million when the thing hit the ground. And in fact, because my mother was a Russian immigrant, when I told her that, she had to translate in her head, lost $35 million. Her first words out of her mouth is, "Where'd you put it?" And I said, no, I lost it like it's gone. And so luckily I had 4 others that went public. But so for me, a scalable startup was shoot for large, raise money from venture capitalists who saw in me, or maybe my co-founders, the ability to make an obscene return. Obscene. Venture capital is not some community support group. It's a rapacious set of investors who want to make, money that the only other type of money you can make like that is selling crack on the street. It's barely legal. But the team you could put together are the best and the brightest. They'll fly from India or China or anywhere else to come in. And then then there are just 2 more, and I'll stop. You're getting the semester lecture here. There are entrepreneurs inside of corporations.
Yes.
Right. So they're fighting. You would think, well, that's easier. They have all these resources. It turns out 99% of everybody else in the company is doing what's called executing a known business model. They come to work to do a standard job, and here you are trying to see the future. And they go, no. Here are the rules about finance, and no, you can't travel without, you can't order that cable, let alone do something else without going through the whole company procedure. And you're trying to act like an innovator. Oh, and the VP of sales thinks you're going to compete with our existing revenue. You can't do that. So being an entrepreneur, inside a large company has its own travails. And then finally, and I'm almost done, you could decide to be a social entrepreneur. That is, you could decide to run a nonprofit, and it's still a startup, but boy, are you in for an education. It turns out, while you think your customers are the people you want to serve, half the time your customers are actually the donors. So, understanding donors' intent actually turns out to be a large part of doing a nonprofit or an NGO.
Yeah.
So for any of you watching, the first thing you want to ask is, well, who am I, and which one do I want to undertake? With a big caveat, I want to say it a million times, there's no one that's better than the other. The only reason I'm giving you this model is that the rules for how to make money, who you could hire, the end points are completely different.
Right.
And you're allowed to change your mind in your career, or even inside, small business. We decide we want to scale, that's okay. Or, but you need to go, oh, now I understand. No wonder why, people won't give me money. I think it's great to make $1 million a year, and it is, but it's not a fundable, scalable business. So Anu, I'm sorry to take us off task, but.
So this actually kind of addresses a question that we have. I'm just looking at the question since we don't have so much time. And it says, the question is, how do you define the success of a startup? By profitability or the number of users? Or, I would say it depends on, like you said, it depends on the aim of the startup, like what type of startup it is, right?
So once we have this fancy word taxonomy that is model of, are we lifestyle or small business or venture backed, whatever. So in a lifestyle business is, can I pay the rent and still keep surfing? In a small business is, can I pay back my bank loan, and can I pay a salary to my employees and pay off my mortgage at home and hire my cousin, right? But if you've taken money from investors in a venture capital in either a seed round or VC, they're not interested that you eked out a profit this week. They're interested in whether you get to, and here's another fancy word, to a liquidity event, which is a fancy word for, can you get bought or go public? And why that's of interest is you're not measured on the profits you're making. You're measured by how much someone will value your entire company, what's called the market cap, and whether the investors could sell stock either on a private sale or on a public market and make, and again, I'll keep using this word, an obscene return, which is, no, they didn't make 20%. They made 3 or 5 or 10 times their amount of money. That's why they took a risk. Because here's the idea. most startups, even in these scalable startups, let's say I'm a venture capital firm and I invested in 10 startups, 5 or 6 of them will fail or just not really go anywhere. 2 or 3 will do okay and return 1x or maybe 1.3 times their money. But there's usually 1, maybe 2 if you're lucky, and out of that 10, that return the entire portfolio, like 10x or 15x, the amount of money you put in. Now, the problem is, they're managing a portfolio and you're managing one company. And so what you want to do is use a method that maximizes your return while your investors are managing the entire portfolio. Does that make sense? And so to answer your question, for you, it depends on your business. In some businesses, it might be, show me how much revenue you're bringing in. I don't care about profit. In other businesses, it might be, I don't care about revenue or profit. Show me how many active users you have. I think it was Instagram who had 300 million users, 35 people. No one knew like whether they're making money or not, but Facebook paid $16 billion to get those users to become their customers so they could make money on those 300 million users. So
likewise with WhatsApp. WhatsApp is similar.
Right. Sorry, maybe it was WhatsApp I was thinking about, but the key question for any of you to ask is, how will my company be valued in a liquidity event, right? Which is a fancy word for what scale or metric are people going to use to put a value on me? Is it that I made a lot of money, that is revenue or profit? Or is it my number of users? Or is it the number of people who clicked on something? Or is it something else? And it's an okay question to ask, but that's one of the questions you want to keep asking yourself as you're going out and doing customer discovery.
Right. So there are quite a few interesting questions here that I'm trying to address. So one is that—
Let's take the best question.
Okay. So one is that if you're passionate about your idea, and then through customer development, you find that in fact, it changes. It's, people that you're asking at least are not finding it as valuable as you had thought. And then, you have to pivot and it's not so interesting to you, then what do you, if your passion doesn't fall in line with the new product or service, like what do you do?
Yeah, so a couple of answers. One is, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that getting out of the building and talking to people is not a giant focus group. That is, it's not, let's go add up all the answers and do what they say. And I'm going to give you a good example. In one of our classes, students were trying to test pricing. And because we make them blog every one of their customer discovery interviews, I kind of knew what had happened. So I kind of knew what to ask them. And they had an app and they were out testing it. And they came back and said, Professor Blank, we're going to price our app at $9.99. I said, really? Well, why don't you share with the class how you came up with that data? Well, this is really exciting for us. We got a great spreadsheet. We talked to, 53 customers and here's the bell curve of what their response was. So I said, why don't you tell everybody about what the outliers on the high end said? Oh yeah, we had 3 crazy people that said this wasn't an app, this is enterprise software. They would pay over $10,000 for the product. Well, what did you do? Why don't you tell the class? Oh, well, those data points were off the curve, so we threw them out and we just kind of averaged that most people would pay $9.99. Big idea. What do you think they should have done? They should have followed it up and said, 3 people said $10,000 or more. Maybe I should find out what were the characteristics of those 3 people and follow that trail for a while. Maybe they were the only 3 people in the world, but actually my instinct was that they had built a piece of valuable enterprise software and they were confusing this with a giant spreadsheet and focus group. The other thing is, particularly if you're building something new, when people say they don't get it or whatever, that is, people say they don't get it or whatever in an existing market, that's pretty good data that like you ought to be paying attention. But in a new market, they may not get it. Describing an iPhone in 1987 might have been a fantasy. So the whole idea and the whole point of this big idea, I would write this down. The purpose of customer development is to inform the founder's vision, not to make the damn decision for you. It's a big idea. You get the data, you can process it, you could discuss it with your co-founders or investors or anybody else and go, well, everybody thinks this sucks. What should we do? And the answer might be, let's keep going. Because here's what we think or believe, or we've been talking to the wrong people, or asking the wrong, or whatever, or we might decide to do something else and pivot. So that's part one. Part two is, at least in the United States, this is a calling, not a job. And so if you end up getting data that says we ought to be doing something I'm not really interested in doing as a founder, well, goddamn it, quit or fold the thing or whatever. Because if you're not passionate about what you're doing in the shower in the morning and still thinking about it, like driving home at night and when you're eating dinner, you shouldn't be the founder of this company. And sometimes it happens that you end up spinning or discovering that it's not a business you're no longer excited about. Guess what? You can start another one. And if you've taken money from other people, then you ought to either give it back or explain it to them, or get your head screwed on for a while and take a break and figure out if you could get excited again. But don't do something that because this will fail. I've never seen an artist forced to make a painting. I mean, seriously, that analogy is absolute. Or somebody will write a play they weren't excited about writing. You'll end up with crap. You'll guarantee a failure. And worse, you'll take down everybody else who's on your team. That's different if you're an employee. If you're an employee, you have different obligations and different choices. But if you're a founder and you're not in the game, for God's sake, get the hell out of it, or take a break and see if you can get back in the game. Right. It's a great question.
Yeah. And I don't know whether we have, as such, we have 4 minutes left, but there are lots of questions here. So I'm not sure whether you have time. I can just.
So there was a good question: is do we need to do some market research?
Yeah.
And so what's really interesting is what I was describing. This customer development process is market research. So when you hear about lean, it turns out that this whole idea of we need to write a business plan and we need to do all that stuff. Some VCs still want to see a business plan, but this customer development process is a way to kind of do the research that people want you to do. So when you hear market research, think about customer discovery and customer validation. Being able to tell an investor, well, we spoke to 75 people, not I read some market research report that said the market is going to be this damn size. Thank you. If market researchers could predict the future, they'd actually be running hedge funds.
So there's one question which is from the class, which is not here, but it was submitted before. And that is, what's one piece of advice you'd give to your college self? So if you were 20 again, and related to that, there's a student who wants to launch his own startup and wondering whether wants to do some management, be a management consultant before that. You think that's counterintuitive? So what?
Oh, I love that question. I used to get that question all the time from my MBA students, is that I want to do a startup, but I want to be a management consultant. And my answer is still 20 years later, you've already decided on the answer. You want to be a management consultant. You can't have both ideas simultaneously in your head. And if you get a great offer from McKinsey or Deloitte or somebody, for God's sake, take it. It's a great management consulting is a honorable profession, but it has nothing to do with startups. And if you're still thinking about those are equivalents, you don't quite understand what it is to be a founder. And I'm going to personally fire you from ever considering that until there's nothing else in your head that says, I want to be a founder, because you're treating them both as jobs. It's a big idea. You're treating both as jobs. They're not equivalent jobs. Management consultant is a great job. Take the job. But startups are like abandoning jobs and going on some adventure. It's not the same. It's not even, you can't equivalence them. It's a great question. I'm not demeaning you or the question, but because I get it a lot. It just means you haven't embraced what the entrepreneur journey is about, at least as a founder. Go become a management consultant for a while. And if you ever end up like going, what am I doing here? I hate it. Then become a founder.
Right. So is that your advice to your to the 20-year-olds, to the students here as well?
No, for me, I took a circuitous journey to become an entrepreneur. I went to a war first. So I at 20 years old, I was in the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia for 2 years and had a different type of adventure.
Mhm.
Though I have to tell you, it was actually in hindsight quite useful in Silicon Valley when people kept saying is, do you understand how risky it is to be an entrepreneur? You could lose your job. And I was in a place where risk had a very different meaning, and you could lose a lot more than your job.
Mhm.
So it made me, fearless was the wrong word, but it made me understand context for the types of risks people have in their lives. So in my 20-year-old self, it would probably be, you could have equally fun adventures not being in a war zone, but I still would probably do the same path again. It's been one heck of a ride.
Mhm.
The other part for those of you who are first generation in the United States, my parents were immigrants, and I got the typical advice of, back then in New York City, it was become an accountant or a lawyer or a dentist or something else. And when it took 25 years until I was finally teaching at Berkeley and Stanford that my mother finally said, "Oh, now I could tell my friends that you actually have a real job." I said, "Mom, I bought you a house. What did you think?" She said, "Oh, I thought you were stealing money." So, so, um, there's a lot of expectations about, what you're supposed to do with your career and life. I guess the thing I still remind my students who come from those cultures is you have to decide when is it you're going to become the adult rather than the child. And that sometimes is a lot of cultural disconnect between expectations of parents versus, because for a long time, being a founder wasn't, and I'm serious about what my mother said, being a founder wasn't considered a real job. It was considered somewhere above a drug addict and maybe, a car thief.
So, well, I'm sure she would think differently if she was here today. But can
Well,
you, so
go
there
ahead.
are a couple, so we will end here. There's a question saying, what's the title of your next book? And
Um, yeah. So I'm working on something called an innovation doctrine about how to think about how large organizations, whether they're large companies or government agencies, can now think about embedding innovation in this age of, having to compete with startups, or for countries having to compete with China or other disruptors. Um, I think the startup world has gotten, it's gone from me, Eric Ries, and Alexander Osterwalder talking about lean and being the only, we were the total available market 2 decades ago, and now it's part of the common language, even though most people give it lip service rather than doing it. I don't think it needs another Steve Blank book on startups. I think, though, the world still really can use is, what does this mean and how should we really practice it on large organizations? So that's what we're working on next, and hopefully next year we'll have a book.
I know we are kind of run out of time, but there is a question saying, is there something that you wish you'd done better or different looking
Yeah,
back?
well, I figured this out luckily before my kids grew up, but and it cost me a couple marriages. Um, you don't get a memo that says, even though you're obsessive about your startup, you ought to be caring about your family and your kids more than anything else. Your investors are not going to tell you that, because if you take money from others, they want you to work 300% on your startup. You won't tell yourself that, because a startup is kind of a fixable problem. You could fix problems and whatever, and while families and kids and relationships are messy and emotional and whatever, and especially if you're kind of on one side of the autistic spectrum, you kind of want to veer away from the emotional stuff and work on the technical stuff. But you don't get that time back. Just having a long weekend with your kids or your spouse doesn't make up for the plays you missed, or the commitments or dinners you've missed with your families, or tucking the kids into bed, etc. And if any of you want to read about that, I have a blog called steveblank.com, and if you just Google steveblank.com, epitaph for an entrepreneur, is what my wife and I did in figuring out how to raise kids, doing 8 startups in 21 years. And I didn't realize this, and no one tells you this. You don't get your report card till your kids leave, and they decide where they want to spend their holidays. And if you're lucky and you did it right, they can't think of a better place than coming home. But you don't know that when you're missing all these things. So actually, the best advice I could give you is, and you won't hear people tell you work less or spend more time with your family because it's not in the interest of the people giving you money. But I would suggest, and I'm not even talking about quote work-life balance. If you're a founder, there is no such thing. That's bullshit. But there is like life. And if you're not working on that part, it will pass you by, and you might end up with a lot of money with a big empty house. That's not where you want to end up. So, so you need to make sure you take care of both of them. And I have to tell you, being a founder, it was the best thing I ever did, and I was glad I did it, and it was one heck of a ride. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful note to end on. Just one more thing. One student says, why don't you come teach at SJSU? And then a colleague of mine has said that, has reminded everyone about your Udacity online class. And of course, there's a steveblank.com as well, which I recommend to my students. So there are ways, even if you don't come and teach here, there are ways in which the students can see your lectures and read what you write. So we can share it on our website.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody.
Thank you so much. And just one sec, because I see that our dean is on the panel as well. Dan, did you want to say a few words at the end? I haven't managed to send him a message, but I see he's there.
I'm not sure if I can speak. Am I visible, hearable?
We got you, Dan.
You're
All right.
not visible.
We hear you.
We can hear you.
All right. Well, anyway, Steve, thanks so much. It was terrific. Really enjoyed it. I'm always learning in these things. So students who spend significant time listening and asking good questions, there I am. Anyway, really appreciate you being part of San Jose State today. Really good things happening here in entrepreneurship and in the College of Business in general. And we've got some student teams that are winning competitions. And I want to remind all our students that we have our own innovation challenge coming up. Applications open pretty soon.
October. Yeah, October 27th.
October. Real prize money, other good things happening. So anyway, great to be a part of this. And Anu, thanks for your great moderation. Stephen, again, thanks so much for your participation. Really appreciate it.
Well, honored to be here, and thanks all the students for hanging on for the last hour and listening to me babble. But you're at a great school with a great set of teachers, and you're about to have some of the most fun of your lives in this profession. So take care.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for being here.